Hi there. Well, it's a privilege to get to talk to you on this topic, something that has become more and more freeing in our lives. Is that in our face? Briefly about our family, I don't know if you read it on the invite or not, but we have 6 kids, and our oldest 2 we have formally graduated from our homeschool. So the oldest is 21 and our youngest is 8. They fall down in between there. And my husband Kevin is a pastor at the Gate Community Church in Brandon.
Hi.
I'd just like to start with prayer, if that's okay. Lord, I thank you so much for each one here. Each parent, each person who takes this job seriously of training and raising their children for you. And I thank you for each child that you have blessed these families with. Oh Lord, I pray that we would just have ears to hear what it is that we're to be learning, and that we would be open to what you're wanting us to hear and to learn and to apply in our lives. That this could become a very joyful journey for each one of us, however that might look. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Well, there we were, sending our 18-year-old son off to another province to go to Bible college. This son of ours, who had always been so pencil resistant, who would do almost anything to avoid writing down even one single word if he could help it, who had never written a paper in his life, besides a few short, and I do mean very short stories in the middle years. He had never taken any notes. How would he do? Would we end up regretting this path we had taken? We could only wait and hope and pray. So, what is unschooling, and how does it differ from homeschooling? Is it just letting your kids run wild and doing whatever they want, whenever they want? Won't they be very narrow and have way too many gaps in their education if they only pursue what they feel like? Are we doing a poor job of preparing them for life beyond school if they never have to do what they don't want to do? Those are certainly questions that I have wrestled with. Or is it really a more natural and effective way of learning? And what does it look like on a daily basis? Now you might think that I'm one of those who hated school and am now rebelling against the system with my own kids, but that's not the case. As a student, I'm one of those types of learners that the school system works fairly well for. I didn't mind school, the work came easy for me, and I could score top marks with minimal effort. And yet, what did I really learn? I remember my brother saying to me, "You might get higher marks than I, but I know way more than you do." And I didn't argue with him because I knew he was right. He was one who was always asking the teachers questions with a desire to really learn. He had never outgrown his curiosity. I could learn the facts and spew out the answers, but was I really learning it? I remember when my oldest boys were about 8 and 6 and they were studying electricity. So I gave them some batteries, some wires, some light bulbs, and some books from the library, and I just let them play. Well, the one day, my oldest son comes to me and he said, "Okay, water is a good conductor of electricity, right?" And I'm like, "Yes." And he says, "Okay, so if I've got a battery and I hook up 2 wires to it, and I got my light bulb here and I got 2 wires coming from it, and I have water in the middle," and I'm cringing. And he says, "And if I put them all in there, will it form a circuit and will the light bulb light up?" And I was like, "Okay, whoa." I remembered from school that electricity and water don't mix. So I was like, no way, we are not doing this. He looks at me and says, "Mom, it's just a battery." And I'm like, "Yes, but electricity and water don't mix." There was no way I was going to let him do that. I was sure he'd end up looking like that. So later on, I'm talking to Kevin and I'm telling him about this thing our son was about to do. And he looks at me and he says, "Carol, it's just a battery." I had memorized a rule, but I didn't really understand electricity. Certainly not as well as my 2 young boys who were just playing and experimenting. Now, I think that most of us homeschoolers would agree that the school system doesn't work well, that it doesn't really teach our kids what they need to know. But then we go ahead and do pretty much the same things that they do in school at home. Now, while I would agree that this is already a huge improvement, I would argue that we're still using an inadequate method. The North American education system was designed for the Industrial Revolution, with the goal of producing obedient, non-thinking for themselves, don't buck the system type people. Is that really the system we want to use in our own homes? In an article by Joshua Davis called How a Radical New Teaching Method Could Unleash a Generation of Geniuses, he quotes, "The fundamental basis of the system is fatally flawed," says Linda Darling-Hammond, professor of education at Stanford and founding director of the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future. In 1970, according to Fortune 500, the top 3 skills in demand in the workforce were the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. No surprise there. But in 1999, the top 3 skills in demand were teamwork, problem solving, and interpersonal skills. It was no longer the 3 R's. We need schools that are developing these skills. He then goes on to say, that's why a new breed of educators are inventing radical new ways for children to learn, grow, and thrive. To them, knowledge isn't a commodity that's delivered from teacher to student, but something that emerges from the student's own curiosity-fueled exploration. Teachers provide prompts, not answers, and then they step aside so that students can teach themselves and one another. They are creating ways for children to discover their passion and uncovering a generation of geniuses in the process. What grabbed me about the idea of homeschooling in the beginning was not creating geniuses, but simply the idea of getting to spend lots of time with our children, pouring into them, raising them to be fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ, as that is my main hope and prayer for each one of our kids. If you'd asked me what my homeschool philosophy was at the beginning, I would have said, teach them at home. Initially, I started out fairly simply. I was not one of those eager beaver keeners who starts out with full-blown curriculum with their 4-year-old spending hours a day on the books. No, I was fairly relaxed. But as my children got older and we had more of them, I began to feel the pressure to be more structured and to make sure that we were covering all the bases. As homeschooling parents, especially moms, we can really feel the pressure to make sure that our kids are getting the best education, or at least as good as the public system. We are the ones responsible for educating them, and we take that responsibility seriously. We've probably all heard about the stats that something like 90% of all homeschoolers score above average, but I think just about every homeschooling mom I've talked to is pretty sure her kids are in the bottom 10%, dragging down the whole average. We often gauge our success or failure by comparing ourselves and our children, even subconsciously, to others. For some, it might be to families who have their kids in school, but for me, it was primarily other homeschooling families. I could look at some and be encouraged. Surely we were doing better than they were. Or I would see others, ones with strong academic focus and structure and all kinds of music lessons and gardens and trips to the senior center, and feel like we were under par, not measuring up. Failing. I was failing. I was failing my kids. They would be the ones to pay the price for my laziness, my distractedness, my incompetence, my inconsistencies. I tried to increase our own academic push, becoming more structured and rigid, and setting higher academic goals as I tried to avoid being left behind in the dust. I had our time very structured so that each child was continually busy through our school hours and that they didn't all need me at the same time. It was a tricky thing to schedule that, and just about any little thing could throw it. And it's always amazing how many little things will throw off your day despite your best intentions. From messy, unorganized kids who keep losing their pencils or that math DVD that they need to do any of their work, to bad attitudes, mine or theirs, to unexpected or expected visitors or phone calls or injuries or a dog thrown up on the floor, etc., etc. And yet I kept trying to do my best. Those were the days when I could be found standing outside a closed bathroom door and yelling at my poor child inside, "You better have brought your math in there." Not exactly my finest moments. I was going over this at home in front of my kids, and my one son said, "Oh yeah, that was me. I remember." Somewhere along the line, I began to question this life. Sure, we may have been spending more time on formal schoolwork, and sure, I might be crossing more things off the list, but were any of us having much fun? I knew that I wasn't. While I do like order and structure, God has also made me to be a fairly laid-back person, and so this driving schedule got old pretty fast. But what else could I do? How else could we get it all done? Being laid back and relaxed when they were young was one thing, but the older they got, the more pressure I felt to be preparing them for life beyond our home and for any post-secondary education they might wish to pursue. It felt like time was running out. During this time, I of course did a lot of praying and seeking God. What was His plan for our family? Should it really look the same as the other homeschooling families I knew? Or should it look different? Somehow totally suited to who we were and how God has made us. I did lots of talking with Kevin, with other homeschoolers, and tried various things, and all the while God was leading me to the path that He had for us. I began to be more and more convinced that we needed to homeschool in a way that suited us as a family, even if it looked different from anyone else. And then I attended what for me turned out to be a life-changing homeschool conference in Saskatoon. I attended a workshop entitled What I Would Do Different If I Had to Do It All Over Again, on the panel there was 4 veteran homeschool parents. It was very interesting to see the diversity of the panel. 2 were emphasizing the need and importance of strong academic push and jumping through all the hoops of testing and transcripts, etc., in order to best prepare your children for post-secondary education and life beyond homeschooling, whereas the 2 others on the panel were on the opposite end of the spectrum. Unschoolers, no formal curriculum, let your child pursue their own interests and learn on their own, etc. It was during the question and answer time that the big moment came for me. The question was asked. We all know the stats that state that the majority of homeschoolers score above average and do very well down the road. But do the studies show that there is any measurable difference in how our homeschool children will do down the road, whether they've been totally unschooled or schooled with a very high academic push and standard, or anywhere in between? Does that show up in the studies as a difference down the road? I waited for the answer and it came. It was no. No. And that hit me so hard. I thought, whoa, we all need to sit here and take a deep breath and just marinate in this. Because if this is true, that how well our children will do down the road is not at all dependent on how we homeschool, but only on the fact that we do homeschool, then why are we putting so much pressure on ourselves? We can relax. There is no need to stress about all that we are or aren't teaching our kids and just enjoy the journey instead. All the studies show that regardless of the type of education system our kids are in, one of the biggest determining factors in how well they will do is parental involvement. Any teacher will tell you that. And in homeschooling, it's all about parental involvement. And I believe this is simply because that's the way God's designed it. He's designed for the parents to train their children. And when we do it His way, it works best. So the main thing is that we homeschool our kids, that we are the ones spending time with them, pouring into them, and journeying together with them. And not what curriculum or method we are using to do that. We do not have to be the best teacher or employ the best method. We just need to be their parent. Isn't that freeing? This was absolutely huge for me. It enabled me to more fully explore what would work best for our family without worrying about the future or comparing ourselves to anyone else. So now that I felt the freedom to pursue the method that was best for our family, what should that look like? Was unschooling really a good option for us? And what would that look like on a day-to-day basis? Unschooling, or delight-directed or discovery learning, is basically where the child learns what they're interested in, and we as parents support them, resource them, and encourage them. Pam Larisha, a 45-year-old unschooling mother in Ontario, says, people tend to mistake unschooling for unparenting. Unschooling parents are very involved with their kids, not in a helicoptery controlling way, but from underneath. Very supportive of whatever they're interested in pursuing and helping them expand their horizons around what they're interested in. Peter Gray, research professor at Boston College, says, "All of the research has convinced me that the natural drives and abilities of young people to learn are fully sufficient to motivate their entire education. We don't have to force them to learn. All we need to do is provide them with the freedom and the opportunities to do so." But how that looks in each individual family, of course, can look quite different. What I would call extreme or pure unschoolers take this into pretty much every area of their lives, where the opinions of their children on every life issue is as valid as the parents', including what and when they eat, go to bed, etc. I personally don't agree with this, especially when they're young. I believe that our children need to learn to do things that they don't want to do, to work and to serve others, and that they need to fit into the family schedule regardless of how they feel at times. Then there are the unschoolers who apply this philosophy more to just their education and in varying degrees. Some let the child study only what they want to, while others require some basic studies for their child that leave the rest more or less up to the child. Or they require basic and specific studies when the child is young and then let them loose as they get older. This last one is more or less what we've been doing with our kids. But regardless of the extent of the philosophy, it is based on the concept that children, and all of us actually, learn best when we are interested in what we are learning. In fact, there are those who would say that that's actually the only way we really learn. We may be able to retain and spew out various facts, but we won't really learn. God has placed within all of us a desire and a capacity to learn and grow. We can see this in all of our children. The amount they learn and develop in those first years is absolutely phenomenal. You can easily see their insatiable appetite to learn about the world around them through their endless questions of why and how they repeat things endlessly. We encourage them, we model for them, we resource them and guide them, and it works beautifully. Then they get to school age, and suddenly we think we need to decide what and when and how they learn. And we can so fill up their time with compulsory education, even as homeschoolers, that they really don't have much time nor energy left to explore their own interests, the ones that God has placed within them. I've heard unschooling advocates say, trust your children. Trust them to learn and to choose what to learn. I would personally change that to trust God. God has placed within each of our children a desire and a hunger to learn and to grow, and He knows the plans that He has for them. He knows what they're going to need down the road. We don't. I remember Todd Wilson saying, our children will become whatever God has created them to become. And I find that very freeing. We don't need to get all stressed about making sure that we expose them to every different subject or topic in life, or they might miss out on their life's mission. We can trust God that He will lead and guide them and expose them to whatever they need. Now, of course, a valid question is, if my child is allowed to do whatever they want, won't they spend all their time playing with dolls or video games and never choose to do anything educational? In all my unschooling research, I have not really seen anyone address the issue of what I call screen time. In other words, if a child is allowed unlimited video game or movie watching time, will they still choose other healthier and more educational options? I kind of doubt it, or at least I think it'll be lessened. It's kind of like eating cookies. I could trust my children to learn to make wise choices themselves as to how many cookies are good for them to eat and to stop themselves from gorging themselves and eat veggies instead, but I have to confess that I don't trust my young kids to do that yet. I could be wrong, but I don't really want to test the theory. So just like we limit the sweets that our kids can eat so that they will choose to eat the healthier food options we put before them, so we personally choose to limit the amount of screen time that our kids can have so that they will choose other more educational, active, and creative options as well. But another valid question is the activity my child choosing to do actually meaningless play, or is it every bit as educational in its own right? I had a fellow homeschooling mom complain that if her children's time wasn't mostly scheduled for them, they would spend all day doing such frivolous things as building forts and planning epic battles with the neighbor boys. Having seen some of these masterpiece forts that they had built, my question was, isn't that education? Aren't they learning a whole lot of life skills in the process of building these forts, not to mention the people and strategy and problem-solving skills that they're employing. We tend to have our ideas of what education looks like fairly limited and in a box. Life is learning. Peter Gray, whom I mentioned earlier, also wrote a wonderful article on the importance of play and all the incredible benefits of it. He feels it is the most important method for children to learn all that they need to learn. It's a fascinating read, and I've put a link. I've got handouts that we can hand out later, and there's a link that'll take you to a site that has his article on there, which is a great read. A study was done in 2009 with 48 children ages 3 to 6, broken into 2 groups. Both groups were given a new toy that had numerous features. With the first group, they gave the toy, they modeled one of the features, and then they left the toy with the kids to play with. The second group, they gave the toy and they didn't show them anything, they just let them at it. The first group, they played with it for a while, they discovered a few more features, and then they were done. But what I found absolutely fascinating was that the second group played with it longer and discovered more features. What does that tell us about how our kids learn? In another experiment, children in remote villages in Ethiopia were given tablets, still in the box with no instruction and just permission to play and explore. These children actually taught themselves to write and to use the camera. Now, using the camera may not seem that amazing since we know that these tablets are made quite user-friendly now. But these tablets had specifically had the cameras disabled. These kids who had never held this kind of technology before actually hacked the cameras and got them working. God has made our children amazing learners and problem solvers. I loved this picture of the Rubik's Cube. We too often give our children answers to remember instead of problems to solve. So, what does this look like in our home, the Ratzlaffs? This thing called unschooling. We are not pure unschoolers, but only employ some of the concepts from it as it seems to fit our family. I would call ourselves relaxed schoolers. If I leave the children to do what they want all day, then most days I would spend very little time with any of them. With only 4 children still at home and the youngest being 8, they're very good at entertaining themselves and playing together. And I can usually pretty much do my own thing all day if I want to. And seeing as how I'm not a let's all go on this field trip together, or let's all do this fun thing kind of person, if I don't schedule time with my kids, it won't happen a lot. And I miss it. I miss them. So, being wired the way that I am, I have found that what works best for us at this point is to have some stuff scheduled. I do schedule in items like learning to read, basic printing, spelling, and basic math. But we are fairly relaxed and flexible even within those. My math-minded children will spend more time and go to a much higher level of math than the ones who don't enjoy math. But they won't mind it because they like math. That's how they're wired. If my child is struggling with learning to read and we're getting frustrated with it, we'll drop it for a while, or slow down the pace or change it up, whatever seems best. We do very little writing, almost none, unless the child wants to, and we mostly just discuss things orally. We love to read aloud all kinds of books, from historical fiction to biographies to true tales. For science, besides just bringing home library books on various topics, our children choose a topic that they're interested in. They research it, they prepare a presentation on it, usually a PowerPoint one, and then they teach it to the rest of the family, being prepared to answer all of our questions. I love this method. They do all the work and then they teach us. It's great. We can guide them in the process and give suggestions or feedback as need be, but they do all the work, and they get the fun of not only learning and discovering this stuff for themselves, but of teaching us. And it's in the process of teaching others that stuff really sticks in our own brains. None of my children are having to do any formal schoolwork that they really dislike, and we're very relaxed and have lots of fun together. We only spend maybe 2 to 3 hours on this stuff in the mornings, and a good portion of that time is reading out loud together, and of course, exercise breaks always take up some of that time too. Andrew Pudwa has said that if you did nothing but read to your children for several hours a day with no other formal teaching, they would still end up doing a lot better than the average high school graduate and have a whole lot more fun along the way. We talk to our kids about what they're interested in, and we try to encourage and resource them along those lines. Our oldest son, Jeremy, became very interested in making videos. So, besides letting him use our own video camera for starters, we ended up buying him a green screen and a black screen and DVDs on filmmaking, and gave him almost endless time to research on his own and to experiment. Siblings and neighbor kids got to star in all kinds of movies. As an adult now, he's still exploring a possible career in filmmaking and has made money on various film projects such as wedding videos, commercials, one of which even aired on national TV. It was Dominion Lending was the commercial. And he also had the amazing experience of traveling to Burkina Faso in Africa and being part of filming a documentary there. Talk about an educational experience. Our second son, Travis, became enamored with computer programming, and in particular through Game Maker. While most boys love playing computer games, ours included, his delight has mostly been in learning how to program them, especially 3D ones. We purchased the Game Maker program for him, gave him a computer to work on until he earned enough money to buy his own, and gave him almost unlimited time to work on it. It was such fun watching him figure out how to do various things, and then put together YouTube tutorials to teach others what he had just spent countless hours learning himself. Through his high school years, he had put together over 40 tutorials, and he has had over 1,300,000 views on all those tutorials put together. While he hated writing, the need to communicate on Game Maker and programming forums, and to respond to all the various comments and questions on his tutorials, motivated him to work on his spelling, and to write, or type, anyway. He built his own computer and has helped numerous people with all kinds of computer troubleshooting. I taught him none of these things. He has learned it all on his own through his own motivation and research. And on that vein, the internet truly has totally revolutionized the way we homeschool. Everything they may want or need to know is the click of a mouse away. Now, of course, there's also many dangers associated with the internet, and each family needs to take those seriously and set up appropriate safeguards for themselves and for their children. But the potential for learning is endless. Our older children have all learned how to research and learn through the internet. They've learned how to look critically at the different sources and not trust everything that they read, and they've learned all of this mostly on their own. Both our oldest boys, Jeremy and Travis, were also blessed with the opportunity to do full-time physical jobs for a few months during their last year of school. One got to work with a construction company and the other a landscaping company. In both cases, it was a wonderful education for them, and incredibly confidence building as they found that they were able to hold down a man's job. It was wonderful to see them rise to the challenge and become responsible in that. And it was neat to see how God provided them with both of those jobs as we hadn't been looking. And it was a wonderful reminder that it's not all up to us. It's not all on our shoulders. God is in this thing too. My brother-in-law has often said, education and skills can always be learned down the road, whereas character is best learned when young. With all the knowledge available at any moment on the internet, we are freed up to spend most of our time or energy on teaching godly character to our children. When our child has a bad attitude, instead of viewing it as an irritating distraction from the really important stuff, we can view it as possibly the most important lesson opportunity of the day. Personally, I really prefer to work on their character with physical work rather than mental work. If a child is upset or emotional, the serotonin in the brain quits flowing and they actually can't think well anymore. Add to that an emotional upset parent, and we are now totally wasting our time if we're trying to get them to do schoolwork. But they can still shovel snow or wash walls or dishes when the serotonin isn't flowing well. I have found that using physical jobs is way easier and way more effective at working on their attitudes. Our oldest daughter, Melissa, who is now 15, loves spending time with and pouring into younger children. And so, to support her in that, we let her do lots of babysitting of our younger children. Just kidding, sort of. Besides pouring into her 3 younger siblings, she has been loving volunteering 2 afternoons a week with the Youth for Christ Literacy Program, working mostly with immigrant children, as well as teaching a Bible study to a group of 8 to 11-year-old girls every other week, something that she initiated on her own. Right now she is at camp in the Leadership and Training program, the LIT program. She's there for 3 weeks. And her dream at this point is to become a foster mom. We've talked about the possibility of her taking some child psychology courses or something like that, but we need to look more into those options. Our 14-year-old son, Andrew, absolutely loves building amazing Connects machines and domino pathways. I had no idea that dominoes could do things like go upstairs. He has spent many hours watching YouTube videos of other people's creations, and then he spends time thinking and planning and figuring out how to incorporate the different ideas and techniques, and then he designs and builds his own creations. We've helped him purchase more Connects and make over 2,000 dominoes, and it was very helpful. We lived in Saskatchewan at this time, and so we got money from the government at that point, and we got to build up our resources that way. We don't know yet how this will play into his life down the road, but we may very well have an architect or an engineer in the making. Our younger children, Stephanie and Curtis, are harder to tell yet, but as each one is different and unique, I am sure that each path will look different. God has made each one of us so special and unique, and we believe that our lives and our education process should reflect that. But does this really work? I mean, in the long haul. Will our children really do well down the road if we don't follow the more conventional methods, making sure we cover all the bases, just like the schools or most other homeschoolers? Will we or our children regret this down the road? As much as unschooling makes logical sense to me, it often has me concerned. What if I'm proven wrong? And I have to confess, even as I've been working on this, I was going, the thoughts still come, the fears and doubts still come. There are many stories of unschoolers doing very well. Dr. Michael Murphy, one of the extreme unschoolers on that homeschooling panel I talked about, is one. I don't have a picture of him, but he was a professor at the University of Saskatoon for 30-some years. He and his wife did literally no formal education with their children. They could watch soap operas or play Lego all day if they wanted. But they also did lots of stuff with their kids. They resourced them and they encouraged them. One of his children is now a criminal lawyer. One is a lawyer for the Attorney General and is over something like 80 other lawyers. And one is married and unschooling their 4 children. Jamie Anderson, the first woman to win Olympic gold in slopestyle snowboarding this winter, was unschooled. Her mom firmly believed that children should be out playing and not sitting at a desk. Her mom says there wasn't a big push for them to read and write and do arithmetic. I wanted them to learn how to get along and let life be the teacher. Character building was more important than academics. It's obviously worked for her and for her siblings as well, I feel. Look them up, they're all doing well, mostly in athletics. When my own dad was 12 years old, his dad died, and as oldest son at home, he had to quit school and take over running the family farm. Years later, when he was around 20, a cousin of his was over and she was working on her high school math. For fun, she challenged him to do some of her problems. She was astonished when he correctly figured out how to do the problems. After all, he only had a 6th grade education. As my dad says, she thought his learning had ended when he stopped going to school, which was obviously not the case. He later went on to take his grade 11 and 12 in 1 year, then on to Bible college, teacher's college, and university, and getting his master's degree in counseling. When our eldest went off to Bible college, I was fairly confident that he would do well. He was wired as a good communicator. He loved to write when inspired to do so and not when instructed by his mother. And he wrote extremely well, despite the fact that I had taught him hardly any formal writing skills. But it was still very encouraging to find out that his very first English paper that he got back had a couple of minor corrections on it, as well as the words, "You have a gift." While probably not even being able to tell you what a noun or a verb was, his marks were in the 90s. But then there was our second son, Travis, the one I told you about at the beginning. My pencil-resistant son who would do anything to avoid writing down even one single word. How would he do at writing research papers and English essays? I had taught him none of that. He excelled at the maths and sciences and computer stuff, but not English. So when he went to Bible school last fall, I told him, ask your professors, ask fellow students, or Google how to write a research paper. I said, you're smart, Travis. This is logical. You can do this. Now, while his papers may not be literary masterpieces, he did end up doing quite well. His first semester marks were pretty much in the 70s and 80s, and his second semester marks moved up and were in the 90s. This mom has been doing the happy dance. He says college was easier than he expected, and he did not feel at a disadvantage at all. And this is huge to me. It wasn't as important to me that he get high marks, but that he could learn to do it on his own without me having to have taught him it all the way. I didn't teach him what most would consider to be essential skills for college, and yet when he needed to learn it, he did. Our kids are very resourceful because God has made them that way. And we spared ourselves years of agony and fighting by not making him do a bunch of writing when he was younger. Now you might be wondering, how can we get our children into post-secondary education if we unschool? First off, while your child may need or choose post-secondary education, I think we're wise to encourage them to look at other options as well. Again, on that handout, there's a link to an article entitled "Why Google Doesn't Care to Hire Top College Graduates." There's actually all kinds of different options in our changing world. Once again, we can be creative and think outside the box. And there's a great website on there, alternatives2school.com. And it's not from a Christian perspective, but there's a lot of great articles and resources on there with just this thinking outside the box and how our kids really learn. John Holt, if you're familiar with him at all, he's sort of the father of unschooling. A lot of it's based on his stuff. But if our kids do decide they need post-secondary education, then there's all kinds of options as well, such as taking one or more college courses online before they're even done high school, and then you already have a student number for that college and they have your marks on record. Or there's CLEP tests or College Plus, which helps you take the CLEP tests, or waiting a year till they're a mature student, etc., etc. Do some research and you can find out all kinds of options. And of course, each college or university is different, with different requirements. When we sent our guys off to Eston Bible College in Saskatchewan, I knew that they were friendly to homeschoolers, so the transcript basically was English satisfactory, science satisfactory, math satisfactory. I just listed that off, and then I said, Travis Ratzlaff has successfully completed all that we've required of him, and we are confident that he is ready for the next stage of life. That was it. That was my official transcript, and they welcomed him in with open arms. So of course it depends on where they're trying to get in, if they are. And then of course there's how do you fill out notification forms and progress reports. And I brought some of my latest ones just as an example if you want to look at them. In general, you can just be very, not very specific. Like, you don't have to put a lot down. John Shaw, sorry, that's his name. He's I have found him to be very encouraging and very positive. In fact, it was, I think, almost a couple years ago that he did a home visit at our place. And I was like, oh, this is scary. But he was just encouraging. Like, he looked at one of our son's Connects things and he was like, oh, you've got to get him to put that in a science fair. That's just amazing. And then for Travis, who was in his last year at that point, he was saying, okay, if you give me his next progress report at the end of grade 12 and request it, I'll give you a letter that says from the Manitoba government that he has completed his homeschool. Like, he was just encouraging. And so it doesn't have to be a scary thing. In fact, he has told me he doesn't like much detail because he has to read every single one. So he's going, no. Basically, they just want to know that you're doing stuff with your kids, that they're learning. So anyway, you can look at these later. Oh yeah, when he did that home visit with us, John Shaw, he said, I am so glad to see that you don't have any major grammar. We don't have any grammar program. He said, oh, so many homeschool moms, they do these extensive grammar things. He said, all you need to do is get them to write something and then correct their grammar in that. And that's it. So that's his perspective. So you don't have to feel like you have to have this major. In fact, Travis, our oldest at home at the time, I was going, shoot, what writing? He's not doing any writing. What am I going to show him? And then I thought, well, that on the computer with these forums, he is. And so that's what I showed him. I said, and actually then we had the numbers of how many communications he had done, and he was totally fine with that. So there's no papers or anything. Anyway, so it doesn't need to be a scary thing. Now I'm sure that you may very well still have some questions or objections, and we're going to take time for question and answer. But I'd like to end my talk with this. Our time with our children at home is precious, and it flies by so quickly. I personally want my children to look back and remember that we had fun, that Mom and Dad supported them in their interests and desires and trusted God to lead them, rather than having the memory of Mom standing over them stern and frustrated, forcing them to spend seemingly endless hours on stuff that seemed to have no significance or value for their lives. These children are entrusted to us not to fill with all the knowledge that they will ever need, but to pour our lives into theirs, in relationship and pointing them to Jesus. Let's have fun with our kids. Let's model a life of passionately pursuing Jesus Christ and His plans for our lives, instead of just following the status quo. Let's be flexible and find out what works for each one of our kids and for our family as a whole, and not compare ourselves to others. In the book of Isaiah, it says, He, God, gently leads those who have young. I believe that, and I've experienced it time and time again, and I know that He will do the same for each one of us as we look to Him. I'm just going to hand these out now, and then if there's any questions here, if you want to just take them and pass it around. One of the things I feel strongly about is that just finding what works for us. Like I think some unschoolers say no books. Well, if books work for you and your kids enjoy them, then do them. Like some kids I was one of those, I loved filling in the blanks and stuff. But of course each kid's different, each family's different.
What about the fact, just what I heard, that social science, all those are mandatory? How do you fill out your report on that?
Well, that's, where we can get a little creative. Like on my notification forms, for math, well, in this one I said math, you see, my kids in the light, are doing that, but like my one daughter, 15, she's not math-minded, we've quit math. So then I'll say, well, I haven't done a notification form since she's quit, I think. But just various life skill things, or, I can't remember exactly how. But for science, I will generally list what resources we have. Like we've got some science DVDs, we've got library books on various scientific topics. And we have our kids researching various topics and making presentations on them. Social studies, we're reading historical novels and biographies, and so, which is, what we end up doing.
And it works. I've done that for years already. For science and social, I don't do any formal books either, and it's never had a problem. I write down the resources we use, which DVDs we watch, specifically list a few things that they know, or if we've been studying social, if we've been studying pioneering, I'll write that down. Studying pioneering, we give the name of a book that we read.
Yeah.
So does that work for high school? Like high school, you need 4 math, 4 science, like 4 of the basic core subjects. So you just write down the resources.
It depends if you're going for an official Manitoba diploma, which we haven't. We just graduate them when we feel like it. When we go, you're done, you're ready to move on. And so, the letter I get from John Shaw didn't say, it just said he's completed his homeschool education. So you don't have to have any of those things.
Brandon University will take that.
Yeah, Brandon University. I don't
Brandon
think
University will take what?
this letter from John Shaw, like if you send it,
Even if you don't have all four, it'll take, he'll give you a letter.
yeah, he gives you a letter saying you've completed your homeschool education. Now, having said that, depends what program you're going into. If this program has a prerequisite of having this course, well then you're going to need that course.
Right.
And that's where knowing where God's leading them and where their interests lie. Like there's that philosophy of we want our kids to have this strong foundation so that they can go any which way. And so we spend the time doing it for all of them. And you can do it that way. I just think it's a lot more painful, personally. I'd rather go, okay, give basic foundation, reading, basic math. Now from there, where's God guiding, putting in you?
Yeah. And you can, I think, challenge a lot of the courses. I mean, if you need to go into a certain specific subject in university, you could write a test to get in, right?
Yeah, those are the CLEP tests. I don't know if there's others.
I'm not sure.
Like CLEP is where you, CLEP, college level entrance preparatory or something like that, where you can, just totally study it yourself, challenge it. You pay, I think, $70 or $80 to take it. There's certain locations you can do it at. And then if you pass it, you've got the course, you've got the credit. College Plus, you pay a fair bit of money. I think that's gotten more expensive, but they really help you do it. They'll say, this is what you need to learn, this is what you need to, how you need to prepare.
But again, like you say, if the child is interested in that subject, it won't be a problem to do that.
Yeah. I love the story I heard from a woman at Matches, and she was saying how her daughter was in high school and they were just fighting over the maths and stuff. Like she was just fed up with it. And so finally she said, okay, forget it. We're not doing this anymore. What do you want to do? And her daughter said, well, I'm thinking that I would like to go to, I guess it was India or Africa, and work in an orphanage. And she's like, okay, great. Skip the math, science. Let's take some midwifery. Let's take some child. I don't remember what they took. And so they finished much more peacefully and friendly. And her daughter went off to wherever it was and worked in an orphanage for a year. And so everything looked great. Her daughter comes back and says, okay, now I really feel God's calling me to be a paramedic. So where's my maths and sciences? I need to give this to enroll it. She's like, do you remember? We dropped that. And she was like, okay, well then I'll do it. And so and we told our boys this too, like this is something you could take, could be helpful, but if you don't want to, it's going to be your time later on. And so that's what her daughter did. She took the courses and she said, I didn't think she could do it, but she did. She took what she needed. She got her paramedics, and then she said, you know what, now I really feel God's actually calling me to be a doctor. And she is pursuing this, and her mom's going, I still don't think she can do it. But she's doing it, and she's motivated, and so no one's fighting with her. And so even though they didn't give her that foundation, in high school, it's not slowing her down. And they had a good relationship through it. Yeah?
I have a son who has Down syndrome, and I'm wondering how, using your approach, how you would teach him writing, because I have a hard time teaching writing, like without, okay, you're gonna sit down and do this.
Yeah, how old is he?
He's 12.
12.
So he does write some, but he hates it. But I make him do it.
It's a tough thing. Like our fifth child, our daughter, she's hearing impaired. And so she's 11, and she's now made great improvement, and she's reading at a grade 2 level. And that's been a huge improvement for her. And it's been a tough thing, because it's like, it doesn't just come easy. And she wants to, but I think she's got some learning challenges in there too. She's flipping letters and different stuff. And so I've been trying to wrestle with that question too. How much, like for her, because she's hearing impaired, I'm going, she needs reading all the more because it opens the world up for her. Like she does have hearing aids, but I don't know, does anyone else have anything to say? Like it is tough because on one hand we can go, everybody needs this for life, but do they? My daughter's oldest son is very dyslexic. He can read and write painfully. He's 22. when he went to Bible school, he audited. And so he can, but it's minimal. So is he going to need it as a major skill for life? Well, he'll probably never excel at it. But I don't know. Does anyone else have feedback on that?
Okay, yeah, you answered it quite well.
Okay.
Did you say for your sons you didn't require writing in the past?
Yeah, very, very little. Any of my kids, really, we do very little. For spelling, I do the sequential spelling. If you're familiar with that, the AVCO, is it? It was written by a dyslexic, so it's very logical and sequential and very pain-free. Because I do all levels at once, and it takes us like 5-10 minutes, and I just stand there. We don't do this every day either. It depends if we're on time or not. I have a whiteboard. I say the word, and the younger ones just copy it as I write it. The older ones, they try to write it on their, or type it if they're resistant to the writing thing. Type it, and then they look up to see if they're right or not, and if they're not, they correct it immediately, and we move on. And so there's no memorizing of lists. And for our son Travis, who became motivated finally to improve his spelling, he said, that's helping me, because it was logical and sequential. And not mindless.
What was that program? What did you call it?
Sequential spelling, or AVCO, I think it is. Yeah, I found it a pain-free kind of way to do it. But we've never done a grammar program at all. And almost no writing. Like, I get them to learn their printing. With some, I've had them do some copy work. But I haven't been with my younger ones. I think that's really where it's like the Lord guides us, hey, each child. It was really encouraging for me with our daughter, Stephanie. I was so struggling. This reading thing was so frustrating. And I was going, she needs this. And I would just really pray, God, what do I do? And I'd struggle on for a bit, and then I'd get this idea. And so, okay, I would try that. And then with lots of breaks, lots of long breaks. Because if she's getting frustrated, I'm getting frustrated, we stop. Anyway, so it was just, there was a lot of repetition, a lot of things I was doing. And just recently we had a couple of teachers over for supper the one evening. And I was talking to them about what I was doing with her, had been doing. And he looked at me and he said, that's exactly what you should have been doing. And I was like, tears welled up. I thought, I would have had no idea, but God did. And he gave it to me bit by bit. I mean, I still have a long way to go with her, but.
With spelling, we found that the more they read, the more the spelling comes by itself. And so when you nurture a love of reading, and they'll learn to spell just because they're seeing the words so much.
Yeah, it helps.